What a weekend of college football, Steve. This has been one hell of a weekend. We ended with a great college game day. We had football from Thursday to Sunday on college football this week. I watched the Florida game instead of NFL. That's how excited I was for college football this week. And then we start off with on Sunday night, we get breaking news on not one, but two Power Five teams firing their head coach. We got a lot to talk about here on Slasher U, the college football podcast episode for Monday Moanings. New episode title for you. Steve brought that up. Great idea. So the Monday Moanings, we're going to give you some thoughts on the firings with the breaking news that came out last night, and some other talks with the top 25, some thoughts of some other coaches we think maybe on the hot seat or should be, and a whole bunch more here on Slasher U. Hey, Steve, how's it going? How was your weekend?
It's been great. I mean, rainy, but compared to the folks, in the Southeast, I'm not going to complain very much, but I mean, overall, and by the way, Fort Myers, we're thinking about you. This is the old Fort Myers Miracle independent minor league team back that Mike Beck bought and operated there. So we're thinking about you there, South Florida. I've worked down there. It's a beautiful area, and looking at the pictures, I just can't imagine how it's ever going to get back to what it once was. But we're thinking of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to spend my weekends, or not weekends, but my spring break vacations down there as a kid. My parents would always take me out to Fort Myers or Sanibel Island. We'd stay at the Gullwing. For some reason, I just remember that the Gullwing Hotel in Fort Myers. We used to go down there every spring break, I think from age 8 to 14 or 15. So definitely thinking about the people down in Fort Myers and the entire Southeast after Hurricane Ian. But let's turn it into some good. Let's try to get people to think about some good things here. Get excited about college football as we try to do here on Slasher U. And let's start off with some breaking news, Steve, because that's exactly what happened last night. And first we thought we were going to have just one breaking news when we were reading this script. And then all of a sudden, hey, we got two. And let's talk about probably the one that's a little more important in the minds of college football fans. And that's out of the Big Ten. Paul Chryst out at Wisconsin after a 2-3 start. He's no longer the head coach. Interim coach will be Jim Leonard, their defensive coordinator. A lot of thoughts here, Stephen. We'll give it to you. What do you think about this right off the bat?
I have to admit, I am surprised, just as from a fan standpoint. I mean, Wisconsin, they have had a gradual decline since 2020. Even though they won 9 games last year, they started off slow, so they had to really rally to get 9 wins. But I think there was a statement that was released by the AD, Chris McIntosh, and it was one line that jumped out at me, and I think it probably explains why Paul Chryst is no longer the head coach of Wisconsin. In the statement, he was called a decision to fire him, because they don't call it a firing. They always call it something nice. But basically, it was in the best long-term interests of the program. So that tells me a couple things. One, people at Wisconsin are getting a little bit nervous about the Big Ten expansion and adding all these teams and being able to keep pace with the Ohio States and the Michigans, and then you'll have USC and UCLA coming in soon. Or we think UCLA is coming in soon. We still don't know that for sure, but I mean, we're assuming they're coming in. But I also think that it is a reflection on the type of recruits that Paul Chryst brings in. And it was the same criticism he had when he was the head coach at Pitt. Good football players. They didn't play fancy, light up the scoreboard kind of football. They were role players. They knew their job. They did it well. And I think to compete in this new environment and this new landscape, I think they're looking to maybe bring in a different kind of coach. And again, Jim Leonard, great defensive back at Wisconsin. He's done a great job with the defense there. He's well respected as far as his understanding of making in-game adjustments for defenses. But I don't know, given that statement, if that's where Wisconsin's going to go.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept with Wisconsin. And the reason I think that is because they seem to always follow the same style of play. And if they find a way to stick to that and do successful, they are successful. We saw it under Brett Bielema, who had in his 6 years, he had 3 conference titles. That's something Paul Chryst didn't accomplish. Now he has a better bowl record than Bielema did. And he's, the records are pretty close. That's why I'm comparing to Brett Bielema. And how close are they? Well, Paul Chryst was 67-26. Brett Bielema, his time at Wisconsin, was 68-24. So almost identical. But Bielema won conference titles. Now that could be the fact that maybe the Big Ten wasn't as strong. I don't know. You be the judge of that. The Big Ten's always been something to really work around. Obviously, Michigan wasn't the same back then, but Ohio State's always been Ohio State. Again, you be the judge of that portion. Paul Chryst won bowl games. Great. Fantastic. But as you said with the athletic director's comments for long-term future, that's winning the Big Ten. That's getting to the college football playoff when it's expanded, because I think that's what their long-term goals are. I think they know that they probably can't find their way in the next year or 2 or maybe 3 years, depending on logistics, that they're not going to make that 4-team playoff, but they easily can make a 12-team playoff. Wisconsin is a team that you could see make that and not be surprised that they're there. So Paul Chryst heading out their way, but you say that they might make a change in a different direction. They have a really tough time doing that, I think. And the reason I think that is because Wisconsin is such a unique recruiting area because of where they're located. And, they get an idea to, draft the big guys so they can, build up front. They have a whole bunch of big guys in the Midwest up north there, and they can recruit them. And then they have a hard time getting some of those skilled players away from the SEC, away from the ACC, and up to the Big Ten in Wisconsin to play. I think that's, usually in the past, their idea is to play smash mouth football in your face is good. But changing it up, is that something that they want to do? I just don't know. And that's why I think Jim Leonhard, if he works out pretty well, is a shoe-in, in my opinion. If he can find a way, the players already love him. We know that. We've seen that in the past. If they find a way to maybe rally here at the end, right now, obviously 2-3 record, if they could find a way to get the 6 wins, and I know that's not saying much about a Wisconsin Badger team, but after firing your coach, if you found your way to make it to a bowl, then that's impressive. Jim Leonhard has a shot here.
Well, he does. I mean, and I think he's a terrific football coach, but I really think it is the new, I don't want to say improved Big Ten. I think that has to be seen over the next 4, 5, 6 years or so. But if you're going to use the same kind of recruiting model and try to bring in the same kind of players, Jesus Christ would not win a Big Ten title in Wisconsin.
Nice.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah. I like wordplay is like one of my favorite things there. But so I think Jim Leonhard, unfortunately, is the right man in the wrong time.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, and Wisconsin their schedule's not that daunting the rest of the way. They should get to 6 wins. They'll get to a bowl, but I don't know. I just don't see if Wisconsin was going to make Leonhard a full-time coach, I think they would have waited to the end of the season. As it is, they owe $16.4 million to Chryst, unless they can find some way to say that he was fired, with cause. I mean, Chryst can say, look, I don't see why I got fired. So I want my $16.4 million. It could be an interesting negotiation there. But plus, I think there might be some names out there, not Urban Meyer, Wisconsin fans. I'm not going to say that. It's okay. He's not going to Wisconsin. He's not going to work in Madison, Wisconsin. He's just not. But I think there's going to be some really good coaches out there that could come into that program and really electrify it.
It takes a special person to be able to coach at Camp Randall. It really does, because of special recruitment, because of the intense play of the Big Ten, and because of the expectations of this program. He was sitting around almost 80% win percentage, and that wasn't enough. In a lot of schools, that's plenty. And that's just not enough for Wisconsin. You look at the rest of the schedule, and yeah, you're right. They do have a shot, I think. They show up against Northwestern next week. Northwestern is not a good team this year. We know that. Then Michigan State, which we're going to talk about Michigan State in a little bit. We know that they are definitely underperforming. Purdue, I don't know about Purdue. We might see some thoughts there. Then Maryland, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. So, I mean, right off the bat, just I can see 3 wins. They need to get 4. I think they can easily steal one from one of those remaining teams. So, I think it's doable to get the 6 with this Wisconsin football team. And Jim Leonard might have a shot. I do think that if there is a coach that they go after, one that strikes my fancy, Steve, right off the bat when I'm looking at potential candidates, and it's not Urban Meyer, like you said too. It's not Deion Sanders. He's going to Auburn. I like Bill O'Brien. I think Bill O'Brien really would be a good fit in Wisconsin. What do you think about that name?
Isn't Bill O'Brien a different version of Paul Chryst? I mean, different offensive philosophies, but I mean, really the same kind of coaching mind. And and I never quite got the hatred that Bill O'Brien got when he was in the college ranks. Okay, in the pro ranks, yeah, okay, he screwed up.
Yeah.
He screwed up a pretty good situation down in Houston, but it wouldn't be a terrible hire, I don't think. But I just think it's going to have to be. Who immediately jumped to my brain
Who's that?
was Eric Bieniemy, because it's obvious that he's not getting a head coaching job in the NFL anytime soon, and they're going to keep using that thing. Well, yeah, he's a great coordinator, but he's never been a head coach anywhere. I can see Eric Bieniemy jumping into a situation like Wisconsin, really making his mark. I'm not saying he's going to stay there a long time, but he's a guy that's going to get media attention. He's going to be a terrific recruiter. He's got a positive attitude. He's tenacious. He's the kind of coach you would think you would have in the Big Ten. So, and again, I didn't see anything that Eric Bieniemy even wants to coach in college. But if he wants a head coaching job in the NFL, unless he wants to go to Jacksonville or a team that's really, the dregs of the earth, I think him coming to college, coaching a few years, putting up a good record, that's going to get him his dream job in the NFL.
That's a good way to look at it. And if you're talking about, you think that Wisconsin needs to change their ways of playing football, that's a good way to start, because that is a completely different offense that we have seen with Wisconsin ever. So that's an interesting. I just think that the Bill O'Brien one, it just like if we got a tweet in the next, I don't know, in the off season, let's just say, because Leonard's going to finish the season out. They're not going to get rid of the interim coach, even if you went 0-7 the rest of the way, because they love Jim Leonard. He was a great player. He's in a bad spot. So if they're not going to make any hiring until the offseason, let's just be aware. But if we saw a tweet that said Bill O'Brien was hired by Wisconsin, I would be like, that tracks. Now, I get it. That's just something that they've done those kind of hirings for years. For the most part, it's worked out. We've seen Wisconsin. I mean, how many times have we seen in the preseason when you're looking at the odds of how many wins they're going to get? It's like 9.5 or 10.5. They're always predicting them to get 9, 10, 11 wins a season. So if they decide that they want to keep that route and say, we think that we can compete in the Big Ten, because that's as far as we need to. We just need to compete, get into that championship game. If we win, great. But if we lose, we still have a shot to be in the top 12. If we lose the Big Ten championship, but we're still in the top 10, top 15 ranked, we have a chance to get one of those 6 at-large bids. We can hit into the expanded playoffs. I think that's where they're looking. Now, do they look and make a drastic change like you said? Very well could as well. And I think that might be the long-term solution as well, to change up the entire program. But again, I just wouldn't be shocked if it was someone like a Bill O'Brien.
Yeah. No. Bill O'Brien, I mean, he should be on every university's radar that's looking to make a change, if they haven't already made a change, at the head coaching position. I just don't know that he's that much different than Paul Chryst. And for them, for Wisconsin to be willing to potentially swallow $16.4 million, I'm sure they'll negotiate it down, to a paltry $8 or $9 million. But I don't see them making that kind of financial commitment to change to then bring in a Bill O'Brien type.
I agree with you 100%. I'm with you on that. All right, let's move on to our other breaking news. Another Power 5 head coach out the door. This is 5 now. We have 5 Power 5 head coaches relieved so far this season. We're finishing week 5. 5 are already out the door. Wouldn't be surprised if we heard another one before we get games going this week. I'm still waiting to hear from Auburn what's going on there. I think the part-time athletic director forgot that he needs to use the phone and create press conferences, because obviously there's one that's missing on the books. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw one in the ACC as well. Regardless, we'll talk about that here in the future. But again, the fifth one going down. This time it's Colorado's head coach, Karl Dorrell. This one's kind of expected. This one is kind of, you see it, the writing's on the wall. They are probably the worst Power 5 team in all of college football. I wouldn't even put them, I would put them in the category as one of the worst football teams in all of college football.
Oh, I agree.
Power 5.
I agree.
So the buyout on this one, pretty decent details on here. Sure. All right, so the buyout on this one, Dorrell, he completed half of his 5-year contract, so he's going to get a buyout of $8.7 million. How about that? Think about that. You you coach one of the historically worst college football teams, and they award you with have a good time, go spend a nice vacation for the next few weeks with this nice $8.7 million check. Wow. Pretty interesting there. The next interim coach will be Mike Sanford for the Buffaloes. He was a head coach for Western Kentucky a few years back, and has 17 years of coaching experience. So it's not a huge step back for the Buffaloes. Obviously, this team has a lot to do when it comes to rebuilding and trying to figure out. When I think of Colorado, I think of the late 90s. This team used to be amazing. This team was, if you thought of college football, you thought of Colorado Buffaloes. You were so excited to watch college football on Saturdays and hope that you could catch a highlight or two of them on ESPN. Because where I grew up in Western New York, we weren't getting those games. But you wanted to catch something. That is not the case this time. You avoid them like the plague. What's your thoughts on this firing here? Obviously not as exciting as the Paul Chryst one. And again, it won't attract as exciting candidates as like a Bill O'Brien maybe. But there is a need for a big-time coach or someone to change this culture to bring Colorado back to its glory days.
Oh, absolutely. This was a Kevorkian firing, because really you needed to put him out of his misery. He jumped out of the gate 4-0, and then after that, it was nothing. The offense, you always hear this cliche, and I always hated it, was very vanilla, but it was just a vanilla offense. I'm not sure they would score points in an intramural flag football league, let alone a Power 5 conference. It was just a bad offense. Defensively, they were just brutal. They lost, let me see, their games this year, 5 losses by at least 23 points or more.
Yeah.
And over his time there, I think the average loss was like 17 or 18 points or more. At a program like Colorado, you just cannot do that and expect us to save your job and save recruits. In the transfer portal, they've lost 2 kids to USC this year. They lost another one. Where did he go? Oh, he went to Michigan State to follow his the former Colorado coach, Mel Tucker. But thankfully that happens. I think Colorado also realizes, you know what? We're not going to be part of the Big 12. We're not going to be part of the Pac-12. If they do some kind of merger, we're going to be kicked aside. So maybe go to the Mountain West. So a guy, like Sanford might make sense for them. Because, I don't see them staying in a Power 5 conference. I simply do not.
Right. No, I'm with you. And the fact that you see these possibilities of these big mergers, ACC, Pac-12, Big 12, we talked about last week on the show, there's a possibility that might add up. Obviously, not every team is going to be able to be along in that. They're not going to grab the entire Pac, the entire Big 12, the entire ACC. The entire ACC might stay because they're going to have the upper hand. But the other 2 conferences, no, that's not going to happen. And with that being said, you're going to have to leave some teams out. Colorado right now is screaming to be one of those teams to be left out, especially how they are. That's just, they have a lot of work to do. They're going to need to, I wouldn't even be shocked if they all of a sudden went down to FCS because they've just been so terrible lately. I don't think that's going to happen. That's a bad joke. But you said 0-5 so far this season, coming off a terrible loss to Arizona, 43-20. Athletic director Rick George said, "I want to thank Karl for his hard work in leading our program since 2020." Now it's obviously a hard spot to to start off in with the COVID year, but still, regardless, he said, ultimately, however, the results on the field just did not measure up to our expectations and standards, which made it necessary for us to make this change at this time. It was an extremely difficult decision, and I wish Carl all the best in his future endeavors. He might be getting one of those letters soon, Rick George, because of everything that's going on with Colorado. Usually when your moneymaker, college football, is doing so bad, the next one after the head coach, if it doesn't get any better, is the athletic director. We saw that with Georgia Tech just last week. Wouldn't be surprised if we see that with something like Colorado here soon.
I know, I agree. And it's not like Darrell everybody was super excited when he was hired. I mean, Tucker left pretty unexpectedly and pretty quickly, so they had to kind of scramble a little bit. But even when he was an offensive coordinator, he was, as my studio falls down, he was criticized for having a very predictable, very bland offense.
Right.
So, I mean, again, he was coordinator at Vanderbilt, so they have a bland everything generally when it comes to football. But still, I mean, how can you have a guy like that take your program to the next level? I just don't see it. I mean, sort of like we were talking about with the Chris firing, they have to do something big because Colorado, like you said, I mean, they used to be a huge deal and nobody played football the way the University of Colorado did. Right. Yeah, I mean, they were doing things that are commonplace now, but when Colorado was doing it, they're like, oh my God, I don't understand. So it's going to be a tough road to hoe. I think if Colorado is smart, at least until things settle down, don't put up a big fight if they get left behind in some kind of conference merger, then go in with Colorado State and, schools like that, be a regional power for a while, Boise State, all those schools.
Yeah.
And then try to maybe build your way back into the conversation.
I think the best thing for Colorado would be to accept a bid into the Mountain West and be a team that could possibly be more competitive in there because they're just outmatched in the Pac-12 right now. They're outmatched. And while they're rebuilding this culture, moving down to a G5, I think would be a great decision. Yeah. Find a way to swap with Fresno State or San Diego State or, there's probably a team I'm missing that could deserve that too. Or just don't swap at all. Just move down. The Mountain West would take you because your conference, your prestige is enough. People still remember the Colorado Buffaloes of the late 90s. Look at us talking about it for 10 minutes. So the Mountain West would be more than happy to talk about it because I'm pretty sure out of all the conferences in college football, the Mountain West is the least talked about. You talk about the American, you talk about the MAC, Sun Belt, you get all of those talks in there. You don't normally hear about the Mountain West too much unless you live in those areas. So I think that they would love to find a way to get themselves out of the bottom conversation talking points of the group of five. I think that Darrell is not going to have a hard time finding a job, though. His resume is pretty great. As you said, I don't think he's going to be a head coach, but I can see himself.
Okay. All right. So coordinator again. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, him being, having coaching, as you said in the past as coordinators, and he also was, coached with the Dolphins, the Jets, the Texans. He might go back to the NFL scene, but yeah, that buyout's gonna be really nice, and then he'll also have a contract somewhere else if he decides he still wants to coach. I'm interested to see where Colorado decides to take this. I think this is almost identical, if not worse, to the Arizona State gig, where they need to desperately find someone who changes the culture.
Yes, and I was racking my brain trying to think, who that guy would be. You would think because it is University of Colorado, Denver Metro, it would be a really enticing place to come coach and recruit. But I wonder if the luster has just gone off to such a degree that you can never make it shine again. I hate to think like that because I fondly remember those Colorado Buffalo teams, and I know we keep beating that drum, but to see what's happened with this program is just shocking. So I don't know where they would go. I would get. I mean, that's why I think maybe Sanford actually has a chance to be a caretaker for a couple of years, where they just give him a 2 or 3 year deal and say, "Look, you're just going to help us tread water. till we can figure out what's going to happen here with us. And then they can make a more permanent move if it doesn't quite work out. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any ideas about who you'd like to see go there?
Man, well, speaking of those, in this case, it'd be late 80s, not late 90s, but speaking of those players, and you mentioned him earlier in the show, what about Eric Bieniemy? I mean, he was a top running back for Colorado back in the day. If you think he could be a good recruiter where he goes in the Big Ten, you know he's still got connections where he went to school. He is still in the Midwest with his coaching in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And this wouldn't be a bad I think this wouldn't be a bad spot for him, but that would, again, it would be up to him if he would want to go from a top-notch, arguably the best offensive coordinator position in all of football with the Kansas City Chiefs right now, to Patrick Mahomes, to head coaching the worst team in college football. Now, this would truly, if this is a test and he wanted to prove that he was a great head coach, this is where you would go. Because if he could turn this program around, he's already seen as a Colorado legend. He would solidify himself as the Colorado legend if he went here. You already see him on list of the top Colorado Buffaloes with Cordell Stewart and, Michael Westbrook and all those guys like that. But, Alfred Williams, I look at me just dating people back, but I could see him take a shot if he was taking a decision. I actually like him better in this spot than Wisconsin because of the ties with Colorado.
You know what? I can't believe I forgot he played there, but that's right. Yeah, that's a great idea. Talk about 6 degrees of Eric Bieniemy. That's why not take him back to Colorado?
Move over Kevin Bacon. We got a new game to play. All right, let's move on here. So there's our breaking news. Look at that, took half our show, but hey, we had to talk about it. We had to get it out because, and on Mondays, I think we might, unfortunately, have to do this even more in the next few weeks. Because I think that there's still going to be some coaches that are on the hot seat. And with that being said, I think that there are some other coaches that need to be looked at with their progress. And that's where I want to shift to now. We just talked about Colorado's head coach. Well, the person that Dorrell relieved was Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker moved on over to Michigan State. He was fantastic last year. This year, not so much. After his season, I think it was 10-1, 11-1, he gets a nice, tasty 10-year, was it $95 million extension? And then look at the Michigan State Spartans now. He's in year 3 of his recruiting. Usually this is the year where you really start paying attention to see how the progress happens, especially after what happened last year with, thinking that Michigan State was really just going to take a step forward and not only be a 10-11 team win, they might battle for the Big Ten. Well, that is obviously not the case this year, as they are dreadful. They're not battling for the top of the Big Ten. They're battling to see who's on the bottom of the Big Ten. Yep. They are a basement Big Ten team this year. Now, with that being said, Twitter has done a lot of roasting of Mel Tucker after the losses of Michigan State. So we won't go too deep into that portions, but he has a huge contract salary. We just saw what happened to Paul Chryst. Shows that with huge buyouts, because that's a pretty big buyout, almost $20 million, that no coach is safe. However, guys like Mel Tucker, Jimbo Fisher, their buyouts are $95 million right now, Steve. Obviously, that might come down because guys like Jimbo Fisher or Mel Tucker will be able to find another job. And usually those buyouts are in relation to the other contracts that they kind of like balance out. So 95 million is probably not 95 million, at least in the long run. However, how much of a leash are you going to give Mel Tucker with the Michigan State Spartans? You saw him succeed last year, but this year, when it's truly his team, the recruits are his now, are not succeeding whatsoever. You have to think this is what the future is going to look like for Michigan State if Mel Tucker's still in charge.
Right. And the thing to factor in here too is that Mel Tucker is a bit of a mercenary. He left Colorado pretty much in a lurch to take the job at Michigan State. When all the rumors about him going to LSU started to fire up, he got help because Adam Schefter came out and said, well, there's at least 2 NFL teams that have reached out to Mel Tucker to see if he'd be interested in coaching. When that happened and Michigan State was on the roll as boosters and athletic departments are prone to do, they overreact and say, "Oh, wait a minute, wait, we're going to give you, let me see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $9.5 million for 10 years." And what's he going to say? He goes, and then even then he almost didn't take it. He's like, "Yeah, but my assistants, they're so loyal and they're good with the kids." He got all of his assistants big raises. So Michigan State seriously has some serious scratch invested into a guy that I'm not even sure that they know that he would stick around of his own volition if another opportunity came around. So with the Michigan State has enough talent to be far more competitive than they are right now. Does it come down to coaching? Does it come down to game planning? Is this now the emperor has no clothes as opposed to everything kind of falling into place? And they had some breaks last year, but still, you have that kind of the season. It's not all luck. I mean, you have to earn that. You have to have the players to do it. But it'll be really fascinating to see how this plays out. I'm sure they could negotiate a reasonable buyout if they wanted to move on from him. Because again, similar to Wisconsin, Michigan State sees the handwriting on the wall too, and they're like, okay, in this all new Big 10 or Big 20 or whatever they're going to be calling themselves in 2 or 3 years.
Big 131, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, exactly. How are we going to compete? I mean, he certainly has the type of personality that engages the press and engages the media. So that's good. You can only, there's only like one Casey Stengel who can just be Casey Stengel, and it doesn't really matter the mistakes he makes on the field because he's Casey Stengel and he's so interesting to talk to. I don't know that Mel Tucker is that interesting to talk to, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Totally shock me if he gets fired in season,
right?
But come bowl time, I'm not going to be surprised if Mel Tucker's name is coming up at some of the schools that we're going to start hearing about, in November, that are going to have openings, or they announce that coach is not coming back, or they're not going to pick up the contract. So maybe it won't kill Michigan State too much, but
to me, this just seems like if he's going to go somewhere else, he's going to go to the NFL, because if this is what his team looks like after 3 years, that to me, that's a recruiting flaw. So what team is going to want to take Mel Turner if you take a 10-11 win Michigan State and then the next year you are not where you should be whatsoever?
right.
Mel Turner is known for a defensive-minded coach. We've seen it throughout his entire career. If you look at his coaching resume, he is defensive-minded. Defensive backs coach, defensive coordinator in the pros and in college. Michigan State is 101st in the nation in total defense. That just can't happen as a Big Ten school, especially if you have a head coach that you're supposed to rely on for the next decade. And then you talk about, well, is it coaching or is it the players? Now, I think you can't put everything on coaching, especially if your head coach is a defensive-minded coach. You have to have top-notch offensive coaches as well. So there could be a blame pointed at the offense coordinator and stuff like that, because they're 92nd in total offense, 92nd and 101 in total offense and defense, respectively, as a Big Ten team, as a team who was a 11-win team last year. How is that regression so bad? It's recruiting. It's absolutely recruiting. It's the guys that the Mel Tucker regime went and got, and those guys aren't panning out. So not only is it coaching, it's the talent that they brought in. It's more than just the people who are calling the plays. It's the people who are bringing in the players to call those plays too. And Mel Tucker is the person who runs that entire show right now. So the finger has to be pointed at him. Regardless of the progress he had last year, the issue relies on Mel Tucker right now because of what is occurring with the Spartans. They're not losing close ones like they won close ones last year.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting embarrassed out there. We saw what happened against Washington or Washington State. Was it Washington? And then we saw what happened last week against Minnesota. So I'm not by any means saying that they can't turn this around, because this is a pretty high prestige school.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, there's a lot of issues to worry about. We have this new thing called the transfer portal, that if recruits or prospects aren't happy with where they're at, they can leave. And the ones that are being successful are usually the ones who go out the door first because they want to be able to compete and go to the SEC or go to the top Big Ten schools. A team like Michigan State, who normally gets those 4-star recruits, top 3-star recruits, maybe a few 5 stars here and there, they'll be the first to go if they're a team that doesn't qualify for a bowl, which doesn't look like they're going to do this year.
Yeah.
A lot of issues, a lot of questions about Mel Tucker and the Michigan State Spartans, a team that was an 11-win team last year. A lot to worry about. This is what Monday Moanings is all about. Look at that. Starting right off the bat with a Monday Moaning, and we're moaning about Michigan State. Look at right off the bat talking about that. I mean, he's 15-10 as a coach for Michigan State right now. But if you look at, he's 0-2 so far this year in the Big Ten. And that's the biggest deal. You know, he was 7-2 in the Big Ten last year with his 11-2 record, won the Peach Bowl. Unless he wins the next 7 games in the Big Ten, he's not living up to where he was in the conference. And I don't see him winning the next 7 games. I think he's still got to play Michigan and Ohio State. So good luck. All right, let's dig into probably the most exciting thing that we get to talk about this week, and that's the top 25 reactions. With the new top 25 out, Steve, I am excited for this one because probably for the first time all season, now I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, but for the first time all season, the top 25, the AP is remotely, I would say 85%, which is pretty good. I'm in agreement with. Now, there might be a number shifted here and there, but they added a lot of the teams who were missing. CC, Kansas Jayhawks. So I am very excited. Before we dig into the top 25, what's your initial reactions of this week's top 25?
Well, again, I think they ignored, and you had a tweet out just before we were prepping here for the show about how 16 undefeated teams and all but 2 got in. And I'm sorry, Coastal Carolina and James Madison deserve to be in the top 25. Did they deserve to be in the top 5? No. Top 10? No. But they're undefeated. You know, so I personally would have put them at 23 and 24.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't really put them in the top 15. I mean, I could, but that would just be more me, hey, get off my lawn kind of stuff. But overall, they did an okay job. I'm flabbergasted. If Penn State wasn't undefeated, I'm not sure I would put them in the top 20. They were terrible the other night. And I don't want to hear about playing conditions, okay? They're about an hour and a half northeast of where I live in Pittsburgh. I was up on a ladder cleaning up my gutters and putting gutters back together and stuff in that same exact rain that they were doing. And I got my work done. I didn't have a problem. Did I get wet? Sure. But, you know, I got a little dirty. Okay. You know, Penn State didn't get dirty in that game against Northwestern.
Steve, you need to coach Arizona State or Colorado. You need a guy that changed the culture. You need a guy that's not afraid to clean out his gutters in the rain. That's what I'm talking about. That's culture changing right there. I agree with you, though, on JMU. Coastal's a little harder for me to give a nod to. They're undefeated, so based on what we've been saying, you know, week by week, if you're undefeated, especially this far in the season, you deserve the top 25. JMU's been absolutely incredible. Moving up to the FBS this year, thinking that they were going to be a team like a UConn, and then all of a sudden they're like, hang on a minute, we got one of the best defenses in the country, and we're going to go undefeated. And not only going to undefeated, we're going to beat decent teams like Appalachian State. We're going to give you a run for your money. I'm excited to see JMU. As you know, both of these teams are in the Sun Belt, and I'm a pretty big fan of the Sun Belt. I'm not excited to see both of these teams play Old Dominion this year because they both play. So I'm not excited for that one by any means. I can definitely give a nod to JMU. I think JMU belongs in the top 25. Coastal, if I had to, again, I would give the nod just because of what we talked about earlier. But if I got a vote, I think I might just leave them out just one more week because the wins they have aren't as impressive as JMU's. Now, again, 5-0, but Georgia Southern is pretty impressive because what they did in Nebraska. The other ones, not so much. All right, let's look at this top 5 here. As we saw a change at the top in the number 1. Georgia moves down to number 2. Alabama jumps them. Ohio State, number 3. Michigan, number 4. Clemson, 5. I'm okay with Georgia being number 2 because they almost lost that football game against Missouri. They were damn close of losing. Do I think Alabama deserves the 1 spot? I think it could have been a toss-up between Bama and Ohio State. I think Georgia should probably be number 3 in the country after that loss, because we've seen some beatings from Ohio State, and then Alabama's took care of Arkansas quite well. So if I'm actually looking at this, I would have not been shocked if Georgia jumped all the way to 3. But regardless, 1, 2, 3, no matter how you look at them, those 3 teams are shoo-ins in my mind for the college football playoffs as we sit right now. Now, go ahead. What you got?
I was going to say, no, I agree. I was going to go down to 4 and 5. And again, this is nitpicky again. There's not going to be 2 teams from the Big Ten in the college football playoff. So when you're ranking these teams, I really think you have to factor that into the equation. Is it fair to Michigan? Maybe not. But unless Michigan beats Ohio State, they're not going to the playoff. So Clemson, who we were just talking about, on Saturday, nobody seems to give them any credit or pay any attention. And I mean, I thought they were going to lose. I have to admit, I thought they were going to lose. They took care of business. They're the number 4 team in the country. Yeah. Because when you're looking at it right now, what 4 teams are going to make the playoff? Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. If you assume that Ohio State beats Michigan in the Big Ten championship based on rankings. Clemson, I think, deserves spot, not even just over the fact that Michigan, or there's not going to be 2 Big Ten teams in the playoffs. But if you look at the wins, Clemson has 2 impressive top 25 wins. One was a top 10 win against NC State just this past weekend. And that was an impressive win. They really took care of Leary, even though you had a really great song about Leary on Saturday. They took care of him, and Clemson looked good. DJ is really, the last 2 weeks, a lot of people have to apologize to DJ after what they said about him this offseason, because he has really turned it around. But yeah, I agree. I think you could move these pieces around any which way or form that you wanted to, but the 5 teams that remain on this slide would remain the same.
Yes.
All right, let's look at the next ones here. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Starting off with USC, Oklahoma State, Tennessee, Ole Miss number 9 after their win against Kentucky, and then Penn State at 10. I already heard you talk about Penn State, where you're not too thrilled about them. Your thoughts on Penn State there. USC at 6. I'm not too upset with that one. I think that their close win last week might deserve them to go down a spot, because I think Oklahoma State deserves that 6th spot over USC in my mind, just because of that tough win over Baylor. What's your thoughts on this top, or 6 through 10?
6 through 9, I'm totally right up and down the line. I think USC is the 6th best team in the country. I don't know that they're good enough to sneak into the top 5 we were just talking about, but Penn State at 10. I had Kansas at number 10. Personally, I thought Kansas has proven itself that, I know that's a huge jump, and we can't move team to play up that much. Oh, no. That's not what we do. They're the 10th best team in the country. So I think they should leapfrog Penn State, and Penn State stays in the conversation only because they're undefeated.
Okay. I'm not mad at that. As someone who has completely jumped on the Kansas Jayhawk bandwagon this year, not mad at that in any way, shape, or form. I'm just so happy that Kansas is finally in the 25, which we're going to get to in a minute. I like the USC talk. I think they are a good football team. I'm just really impressed at what Oklahoma State has done so far this year. I know we talked about that. I know on Saturday we both thought Baylor was going to win that football game because we thought that Baylor was getting disrespected. Oklahoma proved that they are just the better football team. And I would not be shocked if we were talking about the Pokes being the Big 12 champions after this season.
I can't dispute that. I absolutely agree. 100%. Right. I agree with that.
All right, let's look at the next ones, 11 through 15. Utah taking the 11th spot. They lost the first game against Florida in the season, and then just find a way to get better week after week. I like where they sit at 11. Oregon coming back from dropping out of the top 25 after their huge loss to Georgia, and then making their way back up. Same kind of concept as Utah. Kentucky dropping to 13 after their tough loss to Ole Miss. NC State at 14 after their loss to Clemson, and Wake Forest moves back to 15 after a tough win against a once unbeaten Florida State. What do you think about these 5 teams right here? I like Utah and Oregon. I think that's a really nice step up. Good for the Pac-12. I think Kentucky could have dropped a little farther. I'm happy with NC State and Wake Forest, but your thoughts overall?
What other Pac-12 team has not been mentioned yet in the top 15?
Oh, I mean,
The undefeated
UCLA.
LA. Again, they're undefeated. Until they get beat, and I'm sure they're going to find a way to beat themselves, or they're going to look up in the stands and see how, and just get so crestfallen to see how nobody comes out to watch them play, that they're going to come out and just play flat and not have a good week. But I'm sorry, I dropped Penn State to 11. I had UCLA as 12. Utah, Wake Forest, Oregon would round it out my top 15. But at UCLA, you can't have Utah and Oregon ahead of them. Are they better football teams than UCLA? On paper, they are. Are they undefeated, Utah and Oregon? They're not. UCLA is. So I'd have to put UCLA up there up in front of Utah and Oregon. But
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. If it was a top 25 for attendance, though, UCLA would never be mentioned. This is awful. Did you look at the Rose Bowl attendance last week? It was
I did.
47% filled. Capacity is 88,000. And don't get me wrong, that's a lot. That's a lot of people for the fill the Rose Bowl. So if it was not 100%, that's fine. But they only had 41,000 people in attendance for a school as big as UCLA. And I feel like that number's, I think that number's even messed with a little bit too. I don't think there was 41,000 people there.
No, I'm sure there were 41,000 people at some point. I'm not sure they all paid admission to get in there. And I guarantee you, because I watched the end of the game, there weren't 41,000 people in the stands at the end of the game. And that was a really good game. So it's sad. It really is.
Right.
I mean, does the Big Ten really want UCLA? Or is USC insisting, look, we want them to ride our coattails into the Big Ten? I don't know. But right now, none of that matters. They're undefeated, and they should be a top 15 football program.
Going to be a really good matchup next week when UCLA takes on Utah. As I said, Utah just keeps getting better and better week by week after that loss. It's something they did last year. I think that's going to be a really good football game. I'm excited for that one. That'll definitely be on one of our shows, either Friday or Saturday, to talk about for sure. All right, here we go. Finish up top 20. BYU at 16. TCU undefeated at 17, 18. We got 3 unbeatens in a row. 17 TCU, 18 UCLA, 19 Kansas. Look at that. And then I think this is like the best shade of all. They put 19 Kansas in front of number 20 Kansas State, who was ranked last week when Kansas wasn't. So I think that was the AP cowards finally did it. They did what they needed to do. I like seeing these teams in the top 25, seeing teams like this that you normally see. Kansas beating their drought, the longest drought in Power 5 as an unranked team. Illinois now holds that, which they did receive some AP votes. I think they received 6. So that would put them, I think, like 30, 31. So there's a possibility we could see that breaking the drought as well in the future this year. But what's your thoughts on these 5 teams?
Well, I would have had Syracuse in here again, another Power 5 team that's undefeated. So you need to give them some love. I would have dropped BYU back quite a bit. I think BYU has not played up to the usual standards there. And something that I just looked down at my list and I forgot, I actually had TCU number 10. Yeah, because actually I had Kansas 11, Penn State 12, UCLA 13 is how I had it. Then Utah and Wake Forest. But again, I have old man bifocals. I have to make sure that I focus a little better. No, I actually put TCU at number 10. Yeah, but I have no problem putting Kansas 10 and TCU 11.
Yeah, let's do that just for the sake of because since I'm riding the train, let's do that. BYU with that win over Utah State last week. They beat Wyoming. They lost to Oregon, and they beat Baylor. I'm starting to wonder if Baylor can win a top-ranked football team. Now, maybe the disrespect was real because we have seen that. Yeah, the loss from BYU against Oregon, I think, was a big deal, and I think that's maybe shows why they might not be deserving that high. I can get on board with saying that BYU should be lower. And let's round out the last of the top 25 here. Washington at 21, Syracuse 22, Mississippi State 23, Cincinnati finds the top 25 again at 24, and Brian Kelly's LSU comes in at 25. Initially, right off the bat, happy to see the Orangemen in the top 25. I know you want them a little higher. I think they should be higher too, but hey, they're in it. They're in the ball game. That's good to hear. LSU at 25. I have a little bit of an issue with this, although they are one blocked kick away from being an undefeated team. But the way they started last week against Auburn, yes, they came back. Fantastic. That's good. But the way they came back, or the way that they were down against Auburn, a tough, not tough Auburn team this year. I don't think that deserves the next week for you to sneak into the top 25. I think this was a team I would have left out and gave them one more week to prove it for me.
I agree. And Cincinnati, I just don't see this. I mean, should they also receiving votes? Sure. Okay. But again, I would have had Coastal Carolina and James Madison. I actually would have had Coastal Carolina ahead of James Madison. I think down the road, I think offensively, they'll be able to sustain an undefeated run a little bit longer than James Madison will. But I would have had Maryland in here. I had Washington at 20, but I mean Mississippi State. I was really happy to see them in this position here in the top in the last 5 of the 25. But Cincinnati, I'm sorry, I don't think they've played well enough to be considered a top 25 team. And LSU, again, show me one more time, Brian Kelly, and then okay, then we'll let you in.
Yeah, I don't agree with Cincinnati either. I mean, they just beat a Tulsa team who's also lost to Wyoming this year, who lost to Old Miss. Now, Old Miss is a good loss, but Cincinnati doesn't really have the resume. I think they fell out of the top 25 at the beginning of the year because we knew that Cincinnati was not going to be the same team. They might battle for the American, sure, but they're not the same team they were in years past. They're in more of a kind of a building up phase. They're young. This is a young year for them. And I think we both were aware of that coming into this season. I don't see Cincinnati lasting too long in this AP top 25 whatsoever. I could see them falling out. Maybe not next week, but the week after that. I'm pretty sure they play a ranked team in 2 weeks. And I think they play SMU as well pretty soon. So I don't know if they'll be able to hold up with that one. I can see them falling out. LSU, I think, will find their way to make up in the rankings. I think Brian Kelly's got that team figured out. I just didn't like the way they started off that game against Auburn. All right, let's move on here and let's talk a little more before we get you out of here for some Monday moanings. And next I want to talk about, and we kind of already brought it up, and that is Sooners, the Oklahoma Sooners. Huge loss to TCU. Absolute nightmare. Brent Venables, we talked about Venables with on Saturday. What's going on with that defense? Does he just need a little bit more time? What is going on with that team? And then, I said a tweet on Saturday. I said, maybe it's just Venables needs a lot more time because this defense is just not showing what they need to. They lose Dylan Gabriel in the middle of the game. I can't say that's the reason for the loss because they were already getting their butts kicked. That was a terrible hit, by the way. I think they need to find a way to get that out of the game. Maybe even farther than targeting. Targeting is a very controversial call. I understand why they do it, but the way they do it sometimes is not the best way, depending on what kind of refs you got out there. We saw a whole bunch of different kind of refs this weekend. I know there was some Big 12 refs that really had a hard time in the game in some of the games this week. But regardless, hope Dylan Gabriel's all right. We're still waiting on some word on what's going to happen. Maybe today on some of the conferences, maybe Brent Venables will say something. Regardless, they lost against TCU. We saw them lose against Kansas State. That's 2 bad losses in a row. They jump out of the top 25. This was a team that started number 6 in the country. We didn't think that they were going to be this bad of a football team by any means. When you see Brent Venables' name after his success in Clemson, this isn't something that he was just hiding behind Dabo Swinney. Brent Venables is a great football mind. He deserves, doesn't deserve, but he has the opportunity to make a good football team. This is not his team yet. Even with the transfer portal, they have an opportunity to make that team faster, but it's not his team yet. Oklahoma just needs to be patient, but that's not something that Oklahoma fans know how to do. Yeah. So what is wrong with Oklahoma and what needs to happen? Is it time to panic?
Well, I think for this year, if you're expecting to go to a major New Year's Bowl, yeah, you got to start panicking because I'm not sure you're going to get there. I mean, Venables and his defensive coordinator, the Grinch that stole victories, I think I heard somebody call them, Alex Grinch. They're trying to install their defensive schemes and their philosophy with players that they didn't recruit. Like you said, it's not their team yet. I think that's why it's showing so much in Oklahoma. They don't really quite have the athletes that they need to fit what they want to do defensively. They've never been great defensively, and then this past weekend, they might as well have taken all the pads off their defensive players and given them those little red capes that bullfighters do and do the Olay stuff, because it was all Olaying. They weren't making tackles. I mean, it was really, it was disturbing. And offensively, they've had as many points as they put up over the years. They've had problems with consistency on offense. Gabriel has made some costly mistakes at bad times. Penalties are just killing them. They get drives going, and they're jumping offside, or there's a taunting. There's some kind of stupid penalty every game. It's a transition year. I wouldn't panic if I was a real dyed-in-the-wool Sooner fan. I would be upset this year. I might look at other games to watch on Saturdays rather than watching the Sooner game all the way through. You can cheat and go back. I don't see this turning around. And again, I was drinking the Venables Kool-Aid, and the Oklahoma was going to win the Big 12 and run away and hide with it. And it has been anything but that. It makes me sad to one degree, because even though I'm certainly not an Oklahoma fan, I like it when Oklahoma's good. I like it when Oklahoma's in the national championship discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not in the discussion for that. I don't even know that they're going to get, well, they'll get some kind of decent bowl because fans travel. People want to tune in and watch Oklahoma, but this is just not going to be the Sooners year, unfortunately.
I am tempted to make them a bowl bubble team this week. That's how unimpressed I am with this football team. Now, if I do that, it's a death sentence, apparently, because so far this year, every time I put them on a bowl bubble, that team loses, and then that's just what happens. This week I had Louisville, and they lose a crazy heartbreaker to Boston College. I had no one. Pretty sure not only did I hurt Louisville's chances of winning a bowl, I think I might have fired Scott Satterfield in the future here. But when I look at this Oklahoma team, I still have faith in Brent Venables by far. I'm not nowhere near where I am on Mel Tucker level, like we talked about earlier in this conversation. And it comes down to clearly this. Mel Tucker's in year 3, Venables in year 1, regardless of the transfer portal. I know Mel Tucker's tried to build his team in the transfer portal, and I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma does that too, based on prestige and just the team name of being a Sooner. But recruiting is going to be a big deal with this team. Oklahoma is usually great with recruiting. I mean, they got Dylan Gabriel. He's one of the best quarterbacks in all the nation. Hopefully he comes back healthy. Brent Venables can build this team the way he does. He can build it with his defense. I mean, Clemson's defenses have been amazing for how many years now? If you look in the NFL, I wouldn't be shocked if you could look at every team's defense in the National Football League and there's at least one Clemson player on there. Wouldn't be shocked if you could do that. And it has to do a lot with Brent Venables. Now, I think in the next decade, we'll probably be able to say the same thing, given like 4 or 5 years from now, if they actually hold on to Brent Venables and say, I bet you can name a 32 defensive players in the NFL that are from Oklahoma. Because Brent Venables has that potential to do so. Oklahoma fans, you got to be patient. I know that's something you don't do. You haven't done it for a very long time, if ever. I know you're used to winning, but this team just might not have it this year. Be patient. Let him build this team, because if you're not patient, and if this, for some reason, Brent Venables goes away, he gets fired, guess what? You're going to get another new coach, and you're going to be in the same situation. You're still going to have to build. You're still going to have to recruit, and it's year 1 all over again. Relax.
Plus, he's gonna probably get a job in the SEC. He's going to come back and haunt you year in, year out. So,
right. I agree with you 100%. That's it. All right, let's get out of here. Thank you for joining us on this episode of SlasherU, the college football show. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Leave us a comment, hit that subscribe button. Don't be afraid to hit that bell as we come at you live. And there's new videos on the YouTube page every single day. For Christian Brown, Steve Feck, have a good rest of your Monday. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care.